I don't understand the hypocrisy that the West is talking about delisting HTS, but they're not talking about putting off the sanctions.
Thank you very much for these questions. I have always been against sanctions because for us scholars who work on authoritarianism, we do know in certain kind of cases with robust authoritarian regime, sanctions don't work. It affects civilians, it affects the social structure, and not the regime itself. Very the regime became more of building its informal patrimonial structures in order to maintain its authority, and also they would rely on illicit economies as before with more complex
So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone watching. My name is Dr. Shubda Chaudhary, and this is Middle East Insights platform. I would request everyone watching us to like and subscribe and all that razzmatazz. But now we are shifting to a very, very, very important topic, that is complexities of identity making, remaking in Syria. And for that, we have Professor Rahaf Aldoughli, who is a lecturer in Middle East and North African Studies at Lancaster University. She is associated with prestigious organizations including Women in International Security in Washington, D.C., the Kroc Institute Fellowship, the Arab Center for Graduate Studies. Many of them have recognized her contributions in the fields with grants and awards that have affirmed her standing as a legal and leading scholar in Middle Eastern studies. Her research interest spans nationalism, sectarianism, political attitudes within authoritarian context, adopting a very interdisciplinary approach. Her book, Romancing Masculinity in Ba'athist Syria, Gender, Ideology and Identity, with Manchester University Press, investigated gender identity formation during the Ba'athist rule. Additionally, she is also finalizing a manuscript on sectism in Syria, which is scheduled for publication this year. It aims to shed new light on the complexities of identity making and remaking in the times of conflict, which is the topic of our talk today. Her latest project focuses on dissecting the multifaceted drivers of violent behavior in Syrian civil war, and we'll also talk about what is happening right now. At a micro level analysis, she aims to capture first-hand narratives from Syrian fighters seeking to understand their motivations and experiences. The research is not just an academic pursuit, it's a quest to uncover the layers of political behavior in authoritarian regimes and the nuanced factors that drive conflict in the region. Through her work, Professor Rahaf has strived to contribute to the academic discourse on conflict dynamics and offer insights that could guide interventions in the Middle East and beyond. Her goal is to illuminate the intricacies of conflict and explore various avenues of peace and resolution. So, welcome to you, ma'am, and thank you so much for the privilege of your time. My first question to you, ma'am, is can you please tell us what is happening in Syria right now as you see it?
Okay. I thought I will start with the historical background of the foundations of Syrian identity, but let's just shift to the current circumstances now engulfing Syria. So I will start with 2011, which was which marks a transformational moment in Syrian both history and future. And I think the early peaceful demonstrations and mass protests that kind of engulfed all cities in Syria kind of captured the early moments of struggle against and fighting against an authoritarian regime that lasted for 13 years of a very entrenched war, followed by proxy, which kind of termed by many academics and scholars as proxy wars, with the involvement of many regional actors such as Turkey, Iran, and another international actors such as US and Russia. Now, for the last 13 years, we've seen like more of a existing regional dynamics that shows where Assad is the regime is supported by Iran and Russia, and we have Turkey and the US supporting other armed groups. Of course, the involvement of regional actors go beyond only these four actors, but these are the more main regional actors that kind of shaped or established certain political process in order to transit Syria from the Assad rule to a more of an inclusive kind of political phase. However, with the fail of these kind of political processes, many kind of diplomatic negotiations, we had many political processes in place that they were in place actually from the 2013 to 2024. The Syrian war has also been dominated by many armed groups. The emergence of many armed groups. These armed groups were backed up by Turkey, and Syria emerged as since 2012 we have more than hundreds of rival military groups fighting Assad. These armed groups, some of them used to dominate northern Syria, which were backed by Turkey, and then we have another major faction in northeast Syria, controlled like under SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, and these are supported by the US. And we used to have the regime. Now, what happened in November, on the 27th of November, was more of an attack, an offensive led by certain armed groups, led by HTS, which is a designated terrorist group by many Western countries. Now, HTS has its own history that we can maybe refer to. They led this offensive and managed to control first Aleppo and then the rest of Damascus. What we see while it's kind of many scholars have focused on shifts in regional influence, so we no longer and that kind of marks not only the recent developments in Syria, but does give us an idea of a more of a macro perspective of what has been happening in the Middle East after the 7th of October. So what happened in Syria in late November very much is a result of shifts in influence in terms of on the regional level by what happened on the 7th of October. And as you know, Israel kind of extensively or intensively contained Iranian positions in Syria. They kind of also assassinated and killed many Hezbollahs, which is a Shi'i armed group in Lebanon, which was also that actor was involved in the Syrian war on the side of regime. In that moment, with the weakening presence of Iran in Syria and in Lebanon, and the weakening of Hezbollah, that kind of contributed to Syrian armed groups led by HTS to lead that offenses, and they successfully managed to control Damascus, and as a result, Assad fled the country to Russia.
Yeah, and how, as far as we know, HTS had around 20,000 fighters. Most of them, they never really had to fight because most of the Assad military personnel left. They fled.
Yeah.
And one thing which is even more important is that now that Israel is taking control of the buffer
Yeah.
zone of Golan Heights
Yes.
and bombarding the military targets, the defense targets in Syria.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, right now, it just 1 hour before bombed Syria, which caused the earthquake of 3 magnitude in
Yeah.
the Richter scale.
Yeah.
And it is not only apart from the Israeli flag being at Mount Hamo, it's also attacking Dera, Damascus, Latakia, Tartus, and many other areas. A few of the nuclear scientists are also assassinated.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you see that? Um, because on the other side, Turkey
Mm.
also has the nostalgia of Greater Turkey,
Yeah.
and it is injuring the Kurdish population, which is there. More than 20 have been killed, 40 plus injured. US is now striking against so-called ISIS targets. Um, how do you feel
Oh.
about it?
Well, I am originally Syrian and I'm trying now to distance my academic positionality here. So it must be feeling like kind of very mixed of emotions. And I'm speaking here like also I had these kind of conversations with my fellow Syrian academics. We feel kind of very mixed emotions. We are happy and joyful because my generation kind of were born under Assad regime and it was very, very authoritarian and political despotism. However, while we are feeling very joyful about the fall of Assad, we are also concerned about what's happening in southern Syria, where Israel took it as an opportunity to expand. And we have seen from the international community zero reaction to Israel violations, for example, in Palestine or in Gaza. And we have also kind of mixed emotions about Jolani himself and his positioning as controlling and dominating the next political process, which is worrying because he, as a person, he was affiliated with Al-Qaeda before and then ISIS, and then he divorced Qaeda. And there is actually, I will say it, I will say it here, there is a machine or a kind of very orchestrated machine, I would say, among some scholars, Western scholars, funded where they work in certain US institutions that for so many years have been trying to rebrand Jolani and to delist him based on analyzing his narrative. Now, what's kind of my worry, not only as Syrians seeing a warlord kind of dominating the scene now, is that we have a kind of ethical commitment to provide nuanced knowledge, at least. However, it strikes me that fellow academics who are approaching HTS and Jolani from merely terrorist perspective that feeds and serve the interest of the West and how to combat terrorism, but they are not thinking of how Syrians feel about the rise of Jolani to power. This is one thing. So there is kind of miss gaps in terms of conceptual understanding of Jolani's narrative and behavior or HTS behavior. So the approach has always been on his narrative, and these fellow scholars kind of fail to understand that these kind of groups, whether military or authoritarian regimes, they always send two narratives, one internal and one external. The external narratives always try to achieve external legitimacy. Now, what's happening with the insider narrative or the internal narrative that Jolani has been trying for few months, and if we follow his behavior and HTS behavior, has been more of focusing on protecting minority rights, But this is not enough, because minority rights were also used as a tool by authoritarian regime to say that we are good. However, if we look at HTS and its behavior, it's not less than the least we can say about it that authoritarian. We have so many prisons in Idlib, in HTS controlled areas that we know nothing about. We have reports that kind of shows and highlights HTS violations against the human rights. Now, where we are now, we are in the midst, and if you follow the news, you will see that the US and many other Western countries are trying to rebrand or give promises to Jolani about delisting, marking his narratives towards minority only, which is worrying, because again, we are categorizing Syrian people according to their sect.
Yes. Yes.
And ethnic affiliations. And that's not enough to build a more of an inclusive state and a more of an inclusive or a national narrative that represents all Syrians, regardless of their ethnic, sect, or of course, I'm not talking about certain procedures where community rights or cultural rights should be protected after 14 years of war, and also lack of trust among communities that should be achieved, but on another level, but not by when we see it's really disheartening where you see the West is only caring about either using minorities as a threshold of what's acceptable and not acceptable. And no one is talking about what is the education offered in Idlib, for example. No one is commenting on the ideology and how it's expanding. Islamism is expanding and being more of dominating as a uniting force used by HTS and Jolani. No one is touching or talking about this, but we are only limited in how we approach Jolani by, as I said, this kind of giving promises or protections to minorities, and not looking at more of the tactics used in Idlib where he used to control.
Yeah, that is actually something which is very, very, I think, because, and that is one reason why I asked how you feel about it.
Yeah.
And not what you believe about it, how you feel about it.
Yeah, well, we feel there is a level of disappointment, but I think as someone from the Middle East, I'm used to see the failure of international community, the failure of UN, the failure of those kind of hierarchical structures that were in the first place established to protect the democratic values, but you see a totally different story when it comes to this region.
And also, ma'am, I'm coming out of a place of pure ignorance, but there's something which I don't understand. On one hand, and I'm not supporting Hamas or Hezbollah, but I'm just talking about the narrative. On one hand, Hamas and Hezbollah were considered as terrorist organization. And on the other hand, HTS, the US and others are trying to, when there is a bounty on the head of Jolani, they're trying to delist it because now it has come into power. Hamas also came into power democratically.
Exactly. Yeah, the double standards. Yes, exactly. I would say the same. I think, I totally take this argument, which is a very valid argument. And this gives you a sense that now, if you look at the regional influence, which are in shift now, so we see Israel emerging as the main player in Syria. And I think my own guess here it doesn't mean that it's a scholarly opinion or anything. We are still in early days. However, I would think that Israel has some views about delisting Jolani, for example, as long as it serves its geopolitical interest or its interest in southern Syria. Now, what I would say that always the West has. I'm not quite keen on even the term terrorism. As academics, we need to
Yes.
unpack it and decontextualize it, and we have more of a nuance approach to it. So it doesn't mean that if the West listed some groups that they are terrorists, but let me be here clear as well that Hamas, of course, they are not gonna delist Hamas because it affects Israel dominance in Palestine and its project there. However, with Jolani, we are having a different story. It's not about the delisting itself, but what the Israel and the Western countries will achieve from having Jolani in place. And that's the critical question for me. Jolani, for the last few years, he has been acting as a tool to contain ISIS and to contain some extremist groups in Syria. So he acts as a strategic ally for that security perspectives from the West. I know it's complex, but Jolani, even though he was affiliated with Qaeda and with ISIS, for the last few years, he has been acting as someone who can contain the threats posed by ISIS and extremist groups. And I think this is what the West want from him.
Yeah, because a democratic Arab country is very scary for Israel.
Yeah.
And it is scary. And Bashar al-Assad, actually, first of all, he was very cautious during the entire genocide period. He was not speaking for or against Hezbollah also. He was very tight-lipped. At the same time, he also started, as far as I know, giving away, receding from the territory of the Golan Heights slowly and slowly. The troops were. And what really, surprises me, or perhaps doesn't surprise me anymore, the paradox of it, is Joe Biden took credit of the fall of the Assad regime. Netanyahu goes and speaks in Hebrew about the fall of the Assad regime, saying that Israel is ready to stay in peace with all the neighbors who are Alawites, Ismailis, Druze, or Kurds, or Muslims. He does not use the word Syrian.
Yeah, that's exactly if we want to. And I think that's again very worrying, and but I'm not very surprised. So that brings me to bringing me to history. Sorry, that under Ba'ath regime it has always been about camouflaging any sectarian or any identity other than the Ba'ath.
Yes.
So in terms of history, we see that Assad regime, the family, so from the father till and also the son, has been very much like the state ideology or the national kind of narrative is always fixated on the Ba'athi affiliations of all citizens. So there was a process of homogenizing all different identities in Syria, and we are heterogeneous in terms of ethnicity, sect, and even cultures. Now, with 2011's mass protest, that kind of, and the fall of the state and the repression from the regime, here we see the rise of sub-state identities, which is very much brings us to the colonial era, where whether under the mandate system or even under the Ottoman Empire, where we were, the Millet system was in place, different sectarian or religious groups were divided according to their religion. And then after that, we have the French colonialism. And the French colonialism in Syria was always also interested in dividing Syria according to their sectarian identities. So what we are seeing today is reminds us of the colonial era, where Syrians are seen or affiliated with their sectarian groups. And there is really a tricky question here. We have many Syrians were culturally born as Sunnis or Shiites, but they don't believe in any of these sects. And we see like more of so for example, me, I'm culturally Sunni, but I don't really want or identifying myself as Sunni anymore. So that's also a tricky question for many Syrians who don't want to have the Libanization projects on them.
Yeah.
And don't want the Iraqization
Yeah.
kind of result also to be enforced on them. And that's really critical if you see that kind of more of an external legitimation of dividing Syrians along their sectarian identities. And that kind of, so we will face many challenges. Now, the discourse of HTS is important to look at and to follow, but I don't see it beyond used as an accessory to camouflage their other tactics, authoritarian tactics, and Islamization tactics as well, to dominate the Syrians.
And in fact, the interim prime minister who was elected, Mohammed Bashir, he's an engineer.
Yeah.
And in 2021, as far as I know, he did a law degree in Sharia law in Idlib University.
Yeah.
And the first time when he spoke, there was the flag.
Yeah.
The entire flag episode happened. After that, then the Islamist flag was removed and only the Syrian revolutionary flag was used.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and today also at an interview with Al Jazeera, he spoke that HTS is doing back channel diplomacy talks with UN, European Union, with Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, did not say US. And he says that we do need foreign aid, which is understandably so. But at the same time, on the other hand, there is this entire social media paradox that Christians in Aleppo are able to have their first mass, and also the good news that people are coming in protest, and Damascus University is starting, and all of that. The airport will start from 18th of December. But what I really don't understand in this process is that I academically see Jolani as a chameleon. He changes as a chameleon. He changes his colors. First Al-Qaeda, then ISIS, like part of Jabhat al-Nusra and all of that. Then leaving it, then 2020 HTS, starting with Idlib. How much was the support of Turkey? We don't know. To what degree? And what kind of autonomy they have from Turkey? We don't know. Turkey has said that it's ready to give military aid to the Syrian government if it wants. And what bothers me specifically is that the world was completely silent, because in the past years, like the 4 children writing on the walls in Dera at a school in 2011, which started the Syrian uprising, till the last couple of years, there are 30 to 100 Syrians who were killed every week. The crisis of the Sadnaya prison, and that is a certain kind of reality that I don't know if the world is ready to watch. And the pain and trauma and punishment that was met to prisoners. Many of them are still not found. So my question, ma'am, is that there has to be a new kind of social contract developed in Syria, in which there is more power given to civil society.
I totally agree.
It is too soon to say what will happen.
I totally agree. And I think there are certain kind of mechanisms that Syrians need to come together to ensure these mechanisms for transition of democracy to democracy. And I always say this, that I don't expect Syria to transit to democracy after 14 years of very entrenched war, 5 decades of despotism or authoritarianism that we saw. And Syrians have no experience in political opposition while under the form of states. So we don't have political opposition or political parties that used to oppose the regime. So we lack that kind of experience of interaction with the state. This is one thing. And there is another thing that we need to take care of, which is that the political opposition in Syria, even those in diaspora, is very much factionalized and like more of fractured. And this fracturenism is because of many regional actors involved in these in the political dialogues or processes. And so each regional country supports certain kind of political opposition group. And that really will be a challenge for us. Now, to come back to your questions on and again, your observation on how Christians responded or reacted to a HTS role. Now, there is a need to differentiate between what's happening in Syria among different communities on the ground, because in history, we never had that clash among Syrian communities. So we never had a clash between Christians and Sunnis in Syria, for example, but we had few clashes in Damascus between Shia and Sunnis, and that was because not the Syrian Shia, it was because of the Iranian Shia who used to come to old Damascus and try to export their Shia. So where the Sunni community in Damascus was more of angry about this. So what we are seeing, and that's really important to for scholars to analyze this, it's not that the reactions of Christians is a legitimation or a legitimacy provided or given to HTS. It's what's the reality among Syrian communities are that we have this kind of no hostile interactions between the Christians and the Sunnis, and this doesn't mean that this kind of response from the Christians that it's a validation for HTS. HTS, if it reacted or acted in a different way, this means more of a Western attack against it. So how HTS, I think the main kind of approach to what's happening, how TH is monopolizing and manipulating certain narratives and events in order to extend and exert or serve its authority. And I think that's the approach. Not if, oh wow, it's like HTS now has created this kind of nice interactions between divided Syrian communities. No, it was not like that.
Yeah, so exactly.
Yeah, so it's not like they and my concern is that these kind of incidents are taken out of context, of historical context, and it's taken out of and it's being used to serve or rebrand HTS. Now, I'm not against delisting the group after certain assurances that they give. Now, accountability, and as you know, you are academic as well, and you know, like accountability or transitioning to transitional justice is sometimes very complex and difficult to achieve in such a very kind of complex war. However, we need to also serve the moment now where we are. And if HTS is getting external legitimacy, now we need to pressure the international community not to give that delisting out of no assurances, and they need to oversee the process of political transition to make sure that an inclusive government is in place and not some kind of de facto authority enforced on Syrians again.
Yeah, because otherwise, what scares me is that I would not say that Syria will become another Libya, because it has already become to a certain extent, but I'm scared more of the Afghanistan model.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think HTS has been reading and following the Taliban model, actually.
Yeah, and the most interesting thing which I also came to know was Bashar al-Assad, who now suddenly on social media there were his pictures of, completely Western pictures of him circulating, and how he was as a young teenager and all of that. But what really also I found interesting was that for the past 2.5 years, Bashar al-Assad has been siphoning off money to Russia.
Yeah.
More than 250 million
Yeah.
US dollars.
Yeah.
And this was not done in just like one slot. It was done in batches. And the kind of property value that he has in Russia. Now he wants to start a podcast, or he wants to be an ophthalmologist again, and have his clinics in Dubai or Russia, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But there, and this is a very futile question, but does any kind of ICC arrest warrant against Bashar and his brother
Oh, no.
work at any cost? It's a very futile question to ask.
Yeah. Well, that would be the wish of many, 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 many thousands of Syrians. I think I'm not part of that activism, which is a great what they have been doing for the last 14 years, and I think that was a gap in terms of Sydnaya prison. So there have been liberating these prisoners, but without cooperation with Syrian-led civil society organizations that have been working on documenting the violations of Assad for years and years and years. And there is a fear that all of these kind of documentation is lost among these guys. So that's one of the problems with those who kind of liberated with what's happened with Sednaya prison. Now, in terms of, as I said, for the last 13 years, there has been many legal activist groups who have Syrian-led, who have been working on bringing Assad to justice. And I think that's what, from my reading to their statements, they are still following that, and they are not giving up. And I think it's important that Russia gave him humanitarian and not political. And I don't know if Russia actually has the political asylum procedures, but I think at some point Russia might hand him in and sacrifice Assad. But also you might think that Russia is always known for safeguarding its allies, so they won't sacrifice, so that will endanger other alliances in the future that they want to make. But what I'm sure of, that these activist groups will continue to work on at least bringing Assad to accountability for the crimes that he has done.
Yeah, and when we're talking about Russia, we also have to talk about United States.
Yeah,
and there are so many sanctions on Syria.
Yes.
Of different levels. Economically, for people, for Syrians to even operate, be it in the banking system or to get employment, or the currency exchange, that itself is also very difficult right now. And I don't understand the hypocrisy that the West is talking about delisting HTS, but they're not talking about putting off the sanctions.
Thank you very much for these questions. I have always been against sanctions. Because for us scholars who work on authoritarianism, we do know in certain kind of cases with robust authoritarian regime, sanctions don't work. It affects civilians, it affects the social structure, and not the regime itself. On the contrary, the regime became more of building its informal patrimonial structures in order to maintain its authority, and also they would rely on illicit economies as before, with more complex mechanisms to that. But that was the rule of Syrian American diaspora, and I think Syria is not an exceptional case. Yeah. We saw many cases in times of wars and civil wars where the diaspora play, not always, I think, they misread and they miscalculate what's happening. These sanctions, actually, will continue to pose challenges for Syrians or for any new government. Now, what's really kind of worrying as well, as you've just put very, very right and nicely, that we see discussions among in the US about delisting Jolani and promising him for being delisted, but nothing about sanctions, which sanctions actually weaken any coming or any future government. And this brings me not necessarily my scholarly opinion here, but more or less like, do we want, and as from the US perspective, why would we need a strong Syria? Let's like kind of mired Syria with more and more sanctions, weak governance, and that will empower, or kind of Israel doesn't want a very strong neighboring country. And if you followed what Israel has been targeting for the last few days, it's kind of destroying the full military base of Syria after the fall of Assad. So we see that, of course, Israel doesn't want the rebuilding of Syria, of a strong state with a strong military base, because that would threaten Israel. And the US is not different, has been known to be an ally for Israel. And what we are seeing here really even, and that's why there is a need for HTS to take to be not on the front line in terms of or building or establishing a government or a transitional government, because HTS is still listed, and if we don't have delisting of HTS, that will continue to pose these challenges against any new formed government. Of course, this doesn't mean that we need him to be delisted.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he is a warlord.
Yeah.
But what we are seeing now, that rebranding him when it suits the West, and also forgetting that economically Syria is suffering because of these sanctions, and there is no discussion about how to deal with these sanctions now after the fall of Assad.
Yeah, and there's one personal question that I want to ask, and this is a very, very, at the same time, when anything happens in India, I have a joke about diaspora, that no one is as Indian as the Indian who doesn't stay in India.
Yeah.
In that case, so that is what the politics of diaspora is. But my question to you, ma'am, is that you are in the West right now. And suddenly when there is everyone here loves a genocide.
Yeah.
It is so good to, have, oh my God, this is happening, and that's it.
Yeah.
How do you, at a personal level, deal with such newly minted Syrian experts who give a lot of prophecies and analysis about your country by not even having even one intrinsic experience of being there?
Yeah, well, I've written a lot. Actually, I take my anger to publications. I take my anger to what I'm writing and what I'm researching. So many of my journal articles were written out of anger. And the last one was about missing gender and sectarianism scholarship. You saw like the Middle East became more of a hub for scholarship about sectarianization in the region, and how my criticism was against white male Western scholars and their positionality when they are analyzing identities in the region, where they don't have access to these countries. They don't have access to the language. They don't speak the language. And that's really, really essential when you are making about other societies' identities. And I do you have to understand the jokes, the symbolism there, what's happening, everything is has a context. Well, as I said, anger, and I do take this anger to my passion to publish more and more and more. And recently I became senior editor in Cogent Social Sciences in Taylor and Francis.
Wow.
So that was my like kind of intervention, that now I want not only kind of shape knowledge production on the region, but also have a nuance and more voices from the global south when they are
Yes.
writing on their countries. Now, you do feel that there is bias, and the kind of the claim of on that knowledge production is objective or neutral. It's not real. Not at all.
Not-
And I'm not asking, you know what? I think we need as academics to go beyond imagining that knowledge production is neutral or objective, because there is no such a thing. And I think we need to employ an approach which talks about your positionality as a scholar. So I always ask my PhD students, especially those from the West, who are writing on the Middle East, what is your positionality? What's your connection to this topic and how it affected your modes of analysis? Who is funding that project? If
Yeah.
you are a student funded by your state and you are, for example, Turkish student, and you cannot criticize the approach of the Turkish government towards the Kurds, then that's like, okay, that tells me about your modes of analysis. What is missed in your argument and what's really exists? So I
Yeah.
think that's a way in order towards knowledge productions that I think many scholars like me approach it that way. But that doesn't mean that there is no gatekeeping in big journals. For example, this article that took me 3 years in Q1 journal to get to see the light at the end, and sometimes we are being kept because our ideas are so much different from the mainstream. And let me tell you something. In every in one, like, I've written more than 30 journal articles on Syria. They are all in Q1 and Q2. I have a book, I have another book, and I've written extensively on many topics. And when I send my articles for publications, I receive many Western scholars, and it's under peer reviewed.
Yeah.
These reviewers would ask me to cite many white Western
Male
names,
scholars.
but never a scholar from the region. And I
Yeah.
had to reply once to one of the reviewers, telling him or them, I don't know, like, this kind of topic, and that was to the editor of the journal. This kind of topic it's me, the only person who writes on masculinity and Syrian path, and I didn't see my name suggested for citation. However, other kind of white scholars, and I'm speaking to you as an editor in order to see that there is politics of citation, there is politics of inclusivity there. And so, as you know, like, we face this, and we know this.
Yeah.
And we are in our, but that doesn't mean that Western academia is an ideal world.
Yeah.
Not at all. We
Yeah.
had our own challenges and our difficulties. Yeah. So, and I also have like that kind of feeling when I am invited sometimes to panels because I'm only Syrian. However, other scholars, Western, they will be invited because of their titles.
Yes.
And like, yeah, and that's like kind of, I had many kind of, I've talked about this with communications from media platforms, certain channels who would bring me on their platforms as Syrian, but then invite my colleague to provide with the scholarly opinion, as if I'm not scholar. And then that's also an issue, that where you feel yourself that you are being used because you are native, or as an accessory to say, like, look, we are diverse, we are and we are inclusive, so on and so forth.
Also,
But,
gender washing, to have a
yeah,
female
exactly, gender washing as well.
Yes.
Like, let's bring that woman. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, she's Syrian as well. Okay, she
Yeah.
ticks many boxes here.
Yes, exactly. That it happens with me also. I'm like, okay, gender washing happening. But the point is, then I'm like, if that happens, then I'll be the best. to speak at that platform.
Yeah.
That, I understand gender washing is done at every level. The glass ceiling is getting even more difficult to break
Yes.
and
Yeah.
even more invisible. And also the politics of referencing, when you look at all the
Yeah.
bibliography, there's so many white male scholars.
Yeah.
White
Yeah.
male, white male, white
Yeah.
male. And this is something which I find. So when I teach to my students, I'm like, dare you use a foreigner white scholar in the
Yeah.
referencing, I'll cancel the paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is my another form of dictatorship. But I'm like, why don't
Yeah.
you use Arabs?
Yeah.
Or
Exactly. Yeah.
like, or Druze? It's not as if they have not written, it's just
Yeah.
that you have not
Exactly.
searched.
Yeah. 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 No. No.
And that is something which is there. And my question, there's a volunteer asking, Shrishti is asking a question, ma'am, that over the period of time, what do you think, how have Syrians changed their perception of Russia and Iran?
Mm. Well, I think Syrians also for the last 14 years, why they've been like away from practicing under the authoritarianism, we have not been really skillful with our building political opposition inside Syria. But I think they are also very aware, conscious that we cannot fight the whole world. I think Syrians are now more logical in terms of their approach to other regional countries. Even you see many voices now kind of hailing Turkey. And I think that would be for some parts of Syrians. However, I do believe that there is certain national consciousness among Syrians that we don't want anyone. And there is that narrative
Yeah,
among us. And I think that's something that needs to be strengthened and more of put so like many Syrians who were with loyal to the regime but never, and specifically Alawites, because I did a study with another Syrian academic, his name Hayat Tahrir. We worked on Alawites and we collected data that was before the offensive, like 2 months ago. We collected data from Alawites and they are with the regime because they are affiliated with his sect and there is ontological security about them, but they are not with Iranian intervention or Russia intervention.
yeah,
So being Alawite doesn't mean that you are supportive of Iran or Russia. Now, I think there is a consensus among Syrians now that we don't want an Iranian Shi'i project in Syria because that's fractured the social fabric of the country. Although, like my personal opinion, those who want to become Shi'i, it's up to them. Those who want to become Christians, it's up to them. But
yeah,
the important thing is not to use that by external actors to manipulate identities and exert influence politically. So that's where you should intervene and stop demographic change, for example, if it's used for political purposes. I think in terms of Iran, that's solved. Iran is out, and I don't think they have that kind of ideological interference in Syria anymore. But of course, we can expect certain spoilers to be
yeah,
funded and like used by Iran. But this is for the future. We don't know for sure, but drawing from other examples in civil wars or wars, we see that kind of, even with a contained influence by Iran, it still might have access to these spoilers in Syria. Now, in terms of Russia, I think the negotiation is still ongoing.
yeah,
Russia was never kind of interested in changing the social fabric of the Syrian society. And it has always also engaged with certain musalahat or reconciliations in the south. It has also, I think to some extent, and that's from my interviews with Druze in Sueda, that they stopped the regime from attacking Druze community in Sueda. And that's kind of, so Russia's tried to position itself as protecting minorities in the region. So Russia does not have a cultural strategy in Syria, which means that they want to protect their economic interests in the coastal area.
Yeah,
not
the military base and
yeah, and I
yeah.
think that's where the negotiations is. And we've seen from Jolani's or Ahmed al-Shara' latest statements that he is not against Iran, but like not the Iranian people, neither nor against Iran or the Iranian people. They are against Iran's strategy in Syria, but they have like we that he confirmed the kind of that there's no hostility towards the Iranian people or Iranian society. And that's, yeah, I mean, he keeps making these pragmatic or sending these pragmatic statements to
And
the West.
often
Yeah.
delayed after his photo shoots.
Yeah.
After often delayed and after like not at the right time. And Tabassum, another scholar, is asking that for religious minorities like Yazdi,
Yeah.
how will Syria manage their existence where organizations like Al Qaeda and ISIS are very hostile towards their existence?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, like Yazidis were subject to many atrocities under ISIS in when ISIS controlled other areas. However, that exactly brings me to my previous intervention here, where I said that HTS, after divorcing itself from Al Qaeda and ISIS, they were involved in fighting ISIS and ending many other extremist groups that holds these kind of hostile positions against minorities. And I think they are these minority and sorry to say minority groups are still worried and concerned about, because even if HTS has been giving them assurance that they are fighting these extremist groups, yet we don't know to what extent that ISIS will not resurge again in Syria as a result of a power vacuum. And I think that's why the West is, because Jolani has proved himself strong in the last few years in battling and combating other terrorist groups in Syria. But the importance here, he was not combating or ending these other terrorist organizations in Idlib because
Yeah.
he is combating terrorism, but because he doesn't want any other rival group kind of struggling with him or rivaling with him on the legitimacy of Sunniism, of representing Sunni entity. So that's
Yeah.
actually the missed kind of concept from from like what we are seeing in terms of many reports and analysis on Syria.
And also something which I don't understand about ISIS. ISIS, no matter how, like, no, whatever, because every militant group brings Palestine into their ideology, somehow to give it this baptism of faith
Yeah.
that, yeah, Palestinian cause is there. And they all talk about it. Jolani also is from Golan Heights. But at the same time, ISIS has never attacked Israel, apart from
Yeah,
2017.
exactly. Yes.
The ISIS has never attacked. Not that I don't want Mossad sending me love letters that you want ISIS to attack Israel. But the point is
No,
that,
no, yeah.
you know,
No, it's essential, but also there is back to their ideology or to what kind of their narrative is, that there is the far enemy and the near enemy. So I think they are starting with the near enemy, the Muslims,
yeah.
and the ones that, yeah. So that yeah, but like you see, this is more of why, and this is back to the Western narratives of like how using terrorism as a tool, and like that's all needs to be also closely followed.
Yeah. And my last question, ma'am, is can you tell us more about your forthcoming book?
Yeah, okay. Well, I have my, it was almost finished, and the deadline to submit everything on the 30th of January. And it was a book on who owns Sunniism, because I've worked so much on nationalism and secularism in Syria, because the regime always identified and positioned itself as a secular regime. However, since 2012, I've been following the regime's narrative, and there was departure of secularism in regime's narratives. And Bashar al-Assad, for the last 12 years, he's been trying to dominate the Sunni narrative and saying like, I am moderating Islam. I am moderating this kind of religion, because what we have seen is a rise of terrorism because of the lack of religiosity in Syria. So I have documented that in the book. But however, I've collected data from regime-controlled areas from Sunnis in particular, or those who identify themselves as Sunni, where it kind of analyzed their political attitudes, and where if an authoritarian regime gives them their rights to have more religious practices, will they accept or give legitimacy to authoritarianism, or how their political attitudes will shift amidst that. Now, then the second part of the book looks at the rise of other Sunni identities in non-regime controlled areas. So that would be in other areas. Now, what I'm saying, that the recent developments in Syria brings me that the first part of the book, I'm not gonna just say or just delete it, no, but I will use it in comparison with opposition areas and how they conceptualize and perceive or imagine the Sunni identity. And I think that would be by following Jolani's narratives. And already I've documented in the book the many political bodies and entities that try to strive for more of a presence of Sunni identity. But that will be leading into, I will start now the book with who owns Sunniism from the past to today, because I think still what's happening in Syria, it was never about Sunni Shi'i divide or Sunni Alawite divide. I think what we see in the last 14 years is a strive for Sunni identities. Who owns the Sunni identities? And of course, I will bring Turkey now and to see, because you mentioned something about the revival of Ottoman past, which is yes, we are seeing this. And already that project is established or already on the way in northern Syria.
Ottoman Empire, Eretz Israel, all of it together in Syria.
Yeah, exactly.
And Kurdistan also, all of it in Syria. So I'm like, wow, it's like very interesting. But what I'll do, ma'am, now is that I will, whatever papers of yours I can download, I will download it, and then I'll ask you for some PDF so that I can circulate it with my students and they can read it.
I would love yours as well. Yeah, definitely. Yes.
I'll do that, and I will looking at the immediateness, because I'm very disturbed with the attack that happened just 2 hours back. So I will edit this podcast today and upload it, and you can share it with your friends and students. And with this, I don't want to be like a woman to woman thing, but I'm very, very privileged for your presence.
Oh no, thank you. Thank you.
Not just because of the identity of Syrian, not because of that, but because I strongly believe, ma'am, that in any discourse of conflict, no matter which side wins, which side loses, it's always the women and children who suffer.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And that is why we need more voices of their reality, and not the hyper reality that the media or the government wants us to consume.
Really? Yeah.
So I'm very shukran habibti.
Thank you very much, Rahaf. Thank you. And it was I really enjoyed this talk, and I even prepared so many things. But no, I like the style that we are having, this kind of more of a friendly conversation with lots. I hope I was not saying too much about the complexity of
No.
Thank you for having me, and I'm always happy to to actually have this conversation with brilliant academics as well, and that kind of makes the world smaller in that sense, that we are sharing our ideas while from different parts of the world, and I think that's the nice thing about technology. Thank you again for inviting me, and I'm looking forward for your other and following your work even more now.
And two things I'll just say in the end, that first, your life will not go unnoticed.
Oh, thank you.
No matter how much you're trying to differentiate between your personal self and academic self. And second is that all the best for the book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shahada, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.